I'm afraid again of this silly thing.
Right.
I've been afraid of it a dozen times in the last year, and it's never come to anything. Hi everyone, welcome back to our next video here on the Examined Life Daily. I'm Bob.
I'm Autumn.
And today we want to talk about fear. Fear is a tremendously important topic. Fear can go beyond just, little simple things into some big debilitating things that can become anxiety, which kind of before long takes over your whole life. Fear is a broad range of impacts on our lives. So we want to talk about 16 ways that you can alleviate fears in your life. So I'll begin with the first one. And this is one that was very, very important to me. When I've told you before that I'm a worker of the 12 steps. And one of the things you do in the 12 steps when you do a personal inventory, when you examine deeply your life, is you make a fear journal. And when I wrote out my fear journal, I found my life was riddled with fear. And it was amazing how many different ways and things I was afraid of and how debilitating it was. One of the phrases in the AA literature says that fear was like an evil and corroding thread that was woven through the fabric of our lives. And I found that to be true. And so fear can be very, very harmful. So my advice for the very first thing you might want to think about doing is keeping a fear journal. And I would just, carry a little notebook in your pocket or in your purse or just with you. Keep it in any pocket. And as you go through your day and you find yourself having a fear or a worry keeps coming back up in your life, or anxiety. So write down what you're afraid of. And in 3 months, pull out your notebook, keep a notebook. I think this is a good thing to have for the rest of your life. And pull it out in a month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever, I don't know. And look at all the worries you had and think, there was nothing in that at all. And as you go through the worries and fears that you've had, what I think you're going to find, almost always we find, they were nonsense. They never happened. They were just burning energy and making your life hard for absolutely no reason. And I think it's that kind of knowledge and information that you can gain from a fear journal.
I'm thinking about the first time I was exposed to the idea of a fear journal, and it was from a colleague, and he must have done the 12 steps. I thought it was the most brilliant thing. He always carried a notebook around with him. And one day I was like, what is that? Because I would see him pull it up, pull it out, write something down. And then he showed me, and it was massive, thick. It was journals. And he's like, I have journals and journals of these. He's like, I start my day and I write down every single fear I have. And then he's like, would you like to see it? And I loved his transparency in showing me. And he's like, here, give that back to me. And I was like, okay, he writes something down. And then
he had a fear of
yes,
handing that to you.
He did. And then he gave it back to me and I look at it. He's like, I fear how you'll judge me for all my fears. But what I love about this so much is it's facing ourselves. It's putting a mirror to what's already there. Because denying our fears, I think, is actually the path to rumination and more anxiety.
Yes.
And the way you had phrased something about burning energy, it made me think that this particular exercise, it's taking the energy of the fear and it's literally transferring it outside of yourself by putting it on the journal. And what that colleague of mine, he's like, look, these same fears come up every single day, no matter how many times I acknowledge them. What he shared was writing down the fears at the start of his day, let him just face anything. And then when that fear popped up a little later in the day, he would say, oh yeah, I already saw this one coming.
Well, I think it reduces the power of the fear.
Yeah.
Oh, here we go again. I'm afraid again of this silly thing.
Right.
I've been afraid of it a dozen times in the last year, and it's never come to anything.
Right.
I think it's a real release and empowerment to see that it's nonsense. Yeah, my ego's afraid. I'm glad I don't have to be.
Number 2, be mindful of rumination. It intensifies fears. So rumination is a repeated, consistent focus upon something unpleasant, a thought, an idea that just will not go away. It has even some resemblance to things like OCD or obsession. Rumination is essentially, I am so focused on this, and I do not let it go.
And you know, the difference is, you might say, well, isn't writing it down and rumination the same thing? And I don't think so. Rumination increases its power.
Yes.
And when you're ruminating, the body will react. You'll feel the tenseness in the arms and wherever you feel it, well, it'll be different. You'll feel that tenseness. But when you bring it up, when you write it out and say, oh, here it is again, this is back, you're almost laughing at it and you're not feeling it. It's a completely different thing.
Well, that makes me think about how I respond as a therapist when people come in with rumination. And rather than avoid it or push it away, the first step is get curious about it. And to do that, it's let's welcome it as much as possible, because usually something doesn't become a rumination unless we are pushing it away, not listening to the wisdom underneath it. There is a semblance of rationality behind every single one of our fears. That doesn't mean we want to always listen to the fears in the sense of they may really detract from our life's well-being. But if we find that we're ruminating, there is a part within us that says, I am threatened enough that I am not going to let you stop thinking about this. I think the process of writing it out is kind of a similar thing. It's like, let's hear what it's saying. We're not pushing it away. We're not feeding it, but we're acknowledging it. And I think about that story. It's a story of an old Cherokee tale, right?
Well, it's the story of a Cherokee grandfather and his grandson. And he says, Granddad, I was with the other kids today, and I did something that I was embarrassed about, and I felt really bad about it. Why did I do that? I didn't want to do that. I didn't mean it. I said something and then did something. And the grandfather said, you know, son, there are two wolves in each and every one of us. And one of the wolves is good and wants to do good and loving and kind things. But there's another wolf inside of us. And it wants to do that hurtful thing that you did. And it has that strength in it to do harm and to be selfish and self-centered. And then the granddad said, and today you let the angry wolf out, the selfish wolf out. And so the grandson thought about that and he said, but Granddad, how do I know, how do I keep the selfish, self-centered wolf down and not let it take over? And the granddad said, well, whichever one you feed is the one that will be strong and will be acting in your life. And so the story being that you are either feeding the selfless, generous part of yourself, or you are feeding the self-centered, self-seeking part of yourself.
I was thinking about how literal this is biologically in our brain. Our brains are very much like canyons. If you think about the Grand Canyon, anytime it rains, the water is going to flow through the canyon that already exists. It's the path of least resistance, and the water flows that way because it has been, through repetition, carved into the earth. And it's like that in our brain, neurobiologically. A thought is essentially a little burst of electrical impulses and energy that flows very similar, like water, through the canyons of our brain. And so I think that Cherokee story is just a beautiful, kind of poetic way to share what's happening within us.
So the third thing that I think is very, very important to dealing with fear, and it's very much, I think, what you've been saying, is to embrace the fear as an ally and a friend. You know, we have fear as an instinct. We're born with it. Every animal has it, and we're animals. And it's there to help us and guide us and protect us. And sometimes it's there to protect us from our own bad decisions. And so fear is never the enemy, it's an ally. It's when we repress it and fight it and work against it that it becomes the enemy and starts to take over. So by making it an ally, I encourage people to actually talk to the fear. So here's an example. I camp a lot. I'm a nomad. For a very long time now, I've been a nomad, and I've encouraged people to become nomads. That's what I do on my other YouTube channel. And so people will write me and say, but Bob, I want to go do that. I like what you're saying, but I'm afraid of animals. I'll be killed by a bear. So I don't think I can do it. So there's this fear, and it's not an irrational fear. I've had many instances of encounters with bears. It's true. And so this is a normal, healthy fear. They read about bear attacks in the paper, and so they're afraid of it. It's normal. So befriend that. and make it an ally, and make sure that you are then working with it and not against it. So it's important that you not ever think of fear as the enemy. It's a great and important instinctual helper. Embrace it.
Something my favorite author, Elizabeth Gilbert, she's one of my favorite authors, and I believe in her book, Big Magic, she talks about how she realized she couldn't extract fear from her experience, but she made a commitment to herself not to let it in the driver's seat. That basically fear would be in the back seat, it'd be there, it would have a say in decisions, but it wouldn't get the ultimate say. I loved that example about how it's an ally, and we don't want to get rid of it. If we're fearless, there's very good chance we're going to do some pretty harmful things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The second example that I thought of about fear being an ally, I worked in an inpatient treatment center for a while. And I remember I was working with a mentor at the time. I heard him say to a client who was like, I'm really afraid about leaving my inpatient treatment. I just wrapped it up. And he's like, good. It's the people who aren't afraid of relapse that relapse. There is a healthy fear of saying, I recognize what I'm capable of. I recognize where I might slip. I recognize the signs of relapse. Number 4, dig down to see if there is another fear or trauma as a source hidden below the surface. And so I was thinking, we filmed a video earlier today, and in that video, Bob was talking about how ultimately all fears, if we take them to their sort of final root, is a fear of death. And oftentimes, our brain will do really strange things. I think I joke now about having OCD because I have had a heck of a case of OCD in my early life. OCD is an example of this. OCD is, I'm afraid of these things that seem like seemingly, totally unrelated and very even bizarre sometimes. But in the treatment of something like OCD, what you're doing is saying, okay, what is actually underlying all of these alternate obsessions?
Well, one I thought of as something that's underlying is the fear of public speaking.
Oh, yeah.
A nearly universal fear. It's not really the public speaking. It's some other thing that's hiding beneath the fear of public speaking. So really digging down deep and finding out what you're really truly afraid of, I think is very important.
Yes.
So this next step is to look at the fear and find a way to comfort it. So the fear is going to keep coming back because that's its job. It's doing its job because it cares about you. And so it's going to keep coming back. So earlier I gave the example of a bear. People are afraid to go out here and become nomads because they think a bear will eat them. And there is some validity to that. Not much, but a tiny little bit. So my suggestion would be to study the area where you're going and see how likely is a bear attack. So then you think, how do I avoid a bear attack? Well, you keep a clean camp. So you learn all about that. You hang your food, you keep your food away. You carry a firearm or you carry bear spray. You gather the information to virtually eliminate the possibility of a bear attack. And so when the fear comes to you, you say, okay, thank you so much. You're having a conversation because you're embracing the fear as an ally in your life to keep you safe.
Preparedness is almost the purpose of fear. Like, fear at its best is to say, prepare for this. We had shared on a video on Sheep RV Living, I'm a nomad as well, and my parents were quite concerned about me going out. And I didn't think of it like this, but we essentially, the three of us together, made a fear list. We wrote down a fear journal. And we thought, okay, what's every single thing you're concerned about? Here are the things I'm concerned about. And then we came up with a solution for every single one of these things. And of course, there's no guarantee those solutions would work, but not only alleviated my fear and helped me with preparedness, it also reduced their fear because they thought, okay, my daughter's not blindly going out into dangerous scenarios unprepared. The most recent work that I've done is work with survivors of pretty serious assault, and they could have PTSD. One of the things that I would often say is the best path to recover from PTSD is self-defense. So whether that's going to be something like a martial arts training, firearms training, that sense of I've learned from what has harmed me and I am capable and skillful is huge. That just reduces fear so much.
And all these things we're talking about give you confidence.
Yes.
Confidence overcomes fear.
Yeah.
I hadn't even thought about it in those terms, but it's really true. And so you find something that you can be confident in about this fear.
And you know what I'm noticing is a theme in each thing that we're talking about is the importance of examining it. We're the Examine Life Daily.
Yeah.
And so it's the importance of let's look at it. Let's see what we need to do. Let's not hide it. Let's not repress it. Let's not feed it. Let's just look at it.
The truth will set you free. And once it's out in the light, then you can be free from all of these things.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Number 6, whenever fear sends its warnings, have a conversation with it, addressing all of its concerns. I think we've kind of touched on that.
Yeah.
I think it's worth saying again because that brings it into the light, as you just described. The conversation lets fear know you've heard it. I almost think of it like this. If I was trying to tell Bob something over and over again and he just didn't acknowledge it at all, well, I might get more rigorous in my speech, Even just a small acknowledgement of, okay, I've heard you, then I don't feel like I have to push it even harder and harder. And it's just like that within ourselves.
Right. Sometimes the fear will keep coming back and you just have to keep talking to it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Right?
Nothing wrong with that. Number 7, immunize against your fear by facing small bites of it. And this has a name in therapy. What is it?
Exposure therapy.
Exposure therapy.
Yeah.
Yes. You're probably much better at thinking of examples of this than I am. But, well, again, becoming a nomad, going camping, going out into nature. Sometimes that can be frightening. And so maybe you'll start with going to the local park. Maybe one day you'll go drive off into the woods and spend an afternoon at a state park nearby. Maybe you'll keep doing that, and then eventually you'll go out and spend an overnight in a campground and pay, and you'll have people all around you, and you're safe there. So you're just taking little bites at this fear of going out and being in nature and camping. So immunization, I like that phrase. You just little by little take little bites of it until you see that it's really nothing.
And in that process, you learn you can handle it. You learn, okay, not only did I tolerate my fear, but I maybe had some great experiences and learned some new skill sets. A couple examples come to mind, folks who might have more kind of phobias, things like snakes and spiders, which I don't like them, so I understand that phobia. That being said, one way we might use exposure therapy to work with that is it's all with consent. That's a really important part. You don't want to almost shock somebody. That would be really cruel. So with their consent, you bring in like a toy snake or a toy spider and you put it in the corner of the room one session and then just have a whole session on something else. And then each kind of time you meet, you bring it a little bit closer. And this is, it's still fake. It's like the immunization that you talked about, little doses, until you might get a real spider and put it in the corner. And again, it's all open, clear, with a lot of consent. Another thing that I think about, not that I like the pickup artist community, I think that's actually a pretty nasty community, but they have something that I think is really helpful. They encourage any members, which typically are young men, to go ask a girl out every single day, and usually at least like 5 to 10 girls a day, knowing you're going to get rejected. But the idea is expose yourself to the rejection, and it gets easier and easier every single time.
It's confidence.
Yes.
You're building your confidence. Right. As the fake snake moves a little bit closer, the spider moves a little closer every day, you become a little more confident and the fear diminishes.
Absolutely. Yes, it's a combination of it's reducing a misperception that something is horrible. Because that's what our brains will say about so many fears is this is a catastrophic, horrible thing. It's like, maybe not, just unpleasant. And that's really different. It's unpleasant. It's not a catastrophe. Number 8, take a contemplative, mindful walk in nature. So this is a directly physiological suggestion. Like, not only is that enjoyable to do, but it's enjoyable because our nervous system, it's either activated or it's deactivated. And a nice, mindful, relaxing walk helps to deactivate it. Fear is being in a state of heightened stress that if you notice, your body is always tense when you feel fear. No matter what, your body's tense. A nice walk in nature is going to help the body relax.
Very much. Good idea. Yeah. Unless nature is the fear, and then maybe that isn't the thing to do. But for nearly everyone else, it is.
Right.
Just a walk. It's as much the physical activity as it is being in nature.
Absolutely. And if nature is the fear, could be where you could do exposure therapy. Or I think if the premise is what helps your nervous system relax, maybe it's not a walk in nature. Maybe it's a nice, gentle, soothing bath or something like that.
Right. Imagination. Using your imagination. Now, imagination is usually the source of a lot of our fears. Our imagination grabs hold of something and it plays with it and it gets worse, and a form of rumination, really. And the imagination makes it worse and worse and worse. And before long, it's moved out of the realm of imagination into reality. And you think this thing you're imagining is going to be so real that it becomes this fear that you can't overcome. And you can do the opposite with it. And one of the ways I've seen it suggested is get in a calm, natural, healthy state, and then use your imagination to think about the thing that is become so negative to you. Think about it positively.
Olympic athletes will often visualize the perfect jump, or I used to play softball. I would visualize pitching and getting the perfect strike. There's something really powerful neurobiologically about
Very
that
much.
as well, because the brain doesn't quite necessarily recognize the difference between imagination and reality. And so when we're imprinting patterns on our brain saying, here's how I'm doing this well, that just gives more confidence, like you talked about.
Going back to your example earlier of the Grand Canyon, neurons that fire together wire together. So what you're doing is taking this fear of public speaking in this case, and you're wiring it with a positive feeling. And so you're literally rewiring the structure of your brain so that instead of thinking of public speaking as being this terrible experience, it becomes this really positive experience. And you can change your whole life by the act of rewiring your brain so that something you're afraid of or is negative to you, you change the association from a negative feeling to a positive feeling. And that rewiring can really work. And that's the power of the imagination.
Number 10, have a mindful moment and visualize a happy and a calm place. And so we were just thinking, this is kind of similar to the one prior, but there's a slight difference to this. A calm place, that's going to let the body relax. It's going to activate the parasympathetic, is kind of the fancy term of the nervous system whenever it's in a trusting space. When the nervous system is not trusting, or when it's doing something that requires activity, it's in a sympathetic state, activated. So imagining a calm space, I think of EMDR. That's a type of therapy. I'm actually not very well versed in that particular therapy, but one of the first things that you do if you engage in EMDR, which is a trauma focused therapy, is you set a very safe, secure, beautiful, calm, serene place that if your system starts to get overwhelmed, you can imagine and go to that space as your anchor.
And it really kind of goes back to the mind-body connection.
Yes.
The science behind the mind-body connection is just incredible. It's an absolute fact. In fact, no study on any drug will ever take place without a placebo.
Right.
Because just the placebo, the power of the mind and the body can completely change how it works. Putting yourself in that calm place when you think about this fear, the neurons that wire together, fire together, will completely change you. That it'll change your body, and your body will change your mind. Very powerful.
Very powerful.
So number 11 is challenge unhealthy thoughts. And one of the first ways that we have unhealthy thoughts is catastrophic thinking.
Yeah.
And this is a very, very common idea in psychology, that you think of something, and it's really no big deal. But you think about it enough, and you think about it some more, and it becomes bigger. And it's like taking a molehill and turning it into a mountain. And before long, you've just thought about this thing for so long and so much that it becomes this huge catastrophe. So I think you have a good example of catastrophic thinking.
I do. When that happened earlier today in the van, I have a new minivan. This is where catastrophic thinking isn't necessarily based in rationality. I turned the key on to roll down the window, and when I turned the key on, all the lights come up. So like the airbag light, the check engine light, the seatbelt light, they all come on. Well, my mind saw the check engine light, and this has happened a number of times before, and then it just goes away. My catastrophic thinking was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to take my van in and spend thousands of dollars, and now I'm going to have to turn it on long enough to make sure that light turns off, and what if I can't go to Alaska? And so my mind went down this whole path of thinking of the catastrophe from seeing just a little light on my dashboard. Yeah.
That's a really good example. Yeah, it's the imagination being very negative.
Yes.
It's just a light that comes on every single
Right.
time you start the
Every
car,
time.
but somehow today it becomes a catastrophe and your
Right.
life's ruined. But the ability to identify it and say, look at that catastrophic thinking. How silly, and get a laugh out of it.
Yes,
And here we are laughing
right.
about it.
Definitely. I had another supervisor at one point in time, and she always carried in her pocket. I mean, she carried the same piece of paper so long that it was kind of this dirty, nasty piece of paper, but you'd see her pull it out and look at it through the day. And one day I was like, what is that? And on the paper, it had 3 questions. Is this a major inconvenience, a minor inconvenience, or a catastrophe? And what I loved about that is you could always tell, like, if she felt a little bit of stress, because she'd just pull it out, look at it, put it back in her pocket. But I loved it, because if we do have a physical anchor, a physical reminder when the mind starts going on a spiral potentially, and her questions, is this a major inconvenience? Is it a minor inconvenience? Or is it a catastrophe? And then that can help us almost bring it into the light, like you were talking about, and then gauge a course of action.
Right. So you've got to watch out for that unhealthy thinking, and it'll sneak in surprising ways.
And one other thing I'd like to share about that, I love cognitive behavioral therapy. And that type of therapy, it really examines distorted thinking patterns. Our brain does distorted thinking patterns because it's actually, I won't go into depth, but it's a massive survival response, but it can be very unpleasant for us and people in our lives. There's wonderful material out there where you can explore your thinking and see, is it distorted? And if it is distorted, how do I look at things in a more grounded, real, rational, compassionate way? Number 12, mantras. So when I think of a mantra, I think of it as a phrase, an anchoring phrase to come back to. Other ways I think about this are affirmations, or in the daily reflections. You know, Bob has the quote of the day. I share a daily reflection on the same quote. And kind of unintentionally, I didn't intend for those to be like mantras, but it kind of is like, okay, I greet the day this way. And it sets an intention. And so a mantra can be a really powerful just statement, simple, one sentence that can bring your mind back to your intention. And so if you have a fear, you can have a mantra that says, I am capable of tolerating uncertainty, or I gain confidence every single time I face my fear. There's a whole bunch of mantras you can have, but those would be just a few examples.
Yes, and they're very, very helpful. They center you, they bring you back to the moment, and they calm you down.
Yes, yeah, very much like an anchor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Number 13, share with others about it. So if you have a fear, the worst thing you can do is be alone with your own fear. Our brains are biologically designed through evolution to have automatic negative thoughts. If a brush moves over there, I think there's a tiger, because if I don't think there's a tiger and there is, I'll die. So my first thought has to be a tiger. There's not a tiger, but that's my first thought. And so if you live alone with your thoughts, this automatic negative thoughts can become dominant and control your life and become a fear and become irrational. But if you talk to people about it and you say, boy, I've been thinking this way, hopefully they'll say, well, maybe that's true, but have you thought about it this way? Maybe just by talking to someone, it'll become clear to you, this sounds silly just as I'm saying it. I can't even tell you how many times I've said that. Boy, just as I'm saying this sounds silly. And I think one of the great things about sharing your fears is that you're only as sick as your secrets. That's a motto, that's a mantra I live by. And if it's too easy for a little fear to sneak in and fester and become a secret and become something extremely destructive. So getting it out, almost everything in your life is going to be more healing just by the act of sharing it. So having friends in your life you can share your fears with, it will be tremendously helpful to you.
14, physical activity. That is one that I love, again, for the physiological aspect of fear. Fear activates our nervous system, and it tells us to run or fight. And at its worst, freeze, which is basically the state of the animal that got caught, and its best thing is to basically play dead so it doesn't get eaten. If you are having an experience where you're really afraid, if you go for a very brisk walk, a jog, a run, hop on a bike, if jogging is hard on your knees, if you basically let your body, let the adrenaline process pass through you through a physical activity, that can send a message to your brain that you've carried out the threat, that you've escaped the threat, you've ran from the threat. So it's kind of like hijacking our biology in a way, in a really helpful way. And then there's so many benefits to physical exercise in addition to fear. So it's just good all around, really.
Yeah, it's a lot of maybe your body is sending out those stress hormones and the physical activity flushes them from it.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. I know I always feel better after physical activity. And there have been times where if I'm in an extremely stressful state, I'm like, all right, this calls for a sprint. I don't like sprinting. So if you see me sprinting around here, Bob, you know she's
stressed out.
Right.
I'll stay away.
The check engine light must have come on again.
The next one is going along with the physical activity, and that's a relaxing activity. So your body is stressed, you're in this bad place, and so sometimes the thing to do is just to relax and unwind, play in some way, and that will calm your body down. That will take you out of the stress state, and relaxing can in itself flush out the stress hormones and make you calm down and make you more relaxed.
I think of something like yoga. I think of something like a massage. I think of something like Tai Chi, where all of those are so relaxing for the body. Or we were talking earlier about maybe a bath or a walk in nature, anything that's going to basically help your body calm. Now, for folks who have a lot of stress, this is where on the shadow side, compulsive overeating, that's one of my favorite go-to terrible coping mechanisms. That is essentially to help my body relax. Or even a depressant, so something like alcohol, which is a depressant that helps the nervous system relax, which is one of the reasons in the course of treating any kind of compulsive disorder, you do look at like, hey, where's the source of your stress and your fear, so that we're treating the root, not just the symptom, which is the overeating or the alcohol, for example. But if there are really healthy ways to incorporate this relaxation, you know what I do to help myself relax is I make my van really pretty. So my visual environment is so pretty. And then there's order. There's like I know where everything is and everything has a space. And that actually, I get into my van and I think, this is nice. Yeah. Number 16, breathing exercises. I think about how in yoga, there's something called pranayama, which is a series of breathing exercises that the yogis did like thousands and thousands of years ago because they knew the effect that breath had on our nervous system. So we've talked a bit about activating the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system. So it's very, very physical, very biological, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah.
And so if we're really afraid and stressed or angry, if we're in a heightened state, something as simple as making our exhale longer than our inhale. And there's lots of fancy ways to do that. There's counting ways to do that. But if the premise is we make our exhale longer than our inhale, after we do that for even just a minute or two, it can help our nervous system calm down. And if we need more energy, making our exhale shorter than our inhale. So we can really manipulate our breathing to activate our body in certain ways.
You know, that might sound like new age woo-woo, but there's a lot of science behind it. It's very real.
In fact, I will tell you, so if somebody is experiencing a panic attack or a dissociative episode when we're together in a therapeutic context, or somebody was just in a horrible crisis situation and they're in a state of shock, we literally use, we call it 844 breathing to bring them back, basically to just give an anchor and also help their nervous system calm down in its tension.
Very, very powerful.
Okay, we have a bonus. We have 17 things actually, not 16. And this one is rewards. So rewarding yourself, basically giving yourself positive reinforcement when you do something that was courageous or brave, when you've met a goal you were working on. Now, I always want to say you want to be careful with this because you don't want a reward to reverse your goal. So for example, you wouldn't want to have a drink at the end of the week if your goal is sobriety.
Yeah, no,
right.
bad idea.
Yeah, I actually, short story, that is what I had done for myself many times where I'm like, I didn't eat chocolate all week. I'm going to have a piece of chocolate. However, that isn't a beneficial reward, in my opinion. When I think of a really helpful reward, in the same way that we can acknowledge our fears with our trusted community, just having an acknowledgement of, here's where I'm growing. Because Bob was talking about the negativity bias that our brain has, that it has to have for survival. But what that negativity bias is going to do is it's always going to focus on where we need to grow next, on where we still are not who or how we want to be. So to intentionally take a moment to say, all right, I did this. I'm acknowledging it. I'm sitting with the fact that I did do something courageous today, and I'm letting somebody else know it and kind of just being with me in that moment.
I kind of think of it as a healthy celebration.
Yes.
You know, we sometimes our tendency is just to work, and when it comes to self-help and progress and the examined life, it's just work, and oh, I'm not getting very far, and oh, things are hard. And sometimes if you're climbing a mountain, and sometimes this feels like climbing a mountain, you just have to stop and look back and be blown away by the view and by how far you've come. It's a rewarding activity, and that'll be different for all of us. It won't be the same for you that it is for me, but just something to celebrate. Man, I've come a long way, and I am very grateful. I'm celebrating my hard work and the progress I've made. So it's really, really a valuable tool.
I love that hiking analogy because that is so rewarding.
So there you have it. There are 16 with one bonus ways to deal with your fears. And we hope that you'll find something in there that can really help you. Maybe go back over this list and find the one that speaks to you the most and give it a try. I hope there's multiples here that speak to you and allow you to overcome your fears and live your very, very best possible life.
And we created an email for you to write us. If there's a particular fear that maybe just you've ruminated on and feel like you haven't been able to quite get past it, write us. We are doing a new segment where it's Ask Bob, Ask Autumn, and you can email us your specific question and we'll share about it in one of these videos.
So we want to hear from you. We're a new channel. If you would write and tell your family and your friends about this channel, we would be very, very grateful. Subscribe if you haven't, and we'll see you on the next video.
Bye-bye.
Bye.